Hello guys and welcome to Series 5 Episode 7 of the MSC Performance Podcast. Today with myself Luke and Coach Max. Hello Max.
Hello Luke, how are you?
I'm very good, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good indeed.
Fantastic. Today we have a few different questions that we're going to go through. These are kind of questions that we've got through the last week or two that we thought would make a nice episode of the podcast. So we're going to be covering a few things around diets. We're going to be covering a few things about training, a couple of subjects on mentality, and then a little bit of powerlifting related stuff as well. So a full podcast, and I think it will be something for everyone, and hopefully you all enjoy it. But before we get started, Max, tell us about yourself. How's training? How's life? Now the season of rugby's over?
Yeah, training's good. Had our last game of the season on Saturday, so very good, very excited, especially so I'm booked in to do turf games in July, so I'm can really go heavy at that, especially now that I have kind of 4 more days that I could potentially put sessions in, because if I'm training Tuesday, Thursday, playing on a Saturday, couldn't train really Saturday, Sunday or maybe Friday, so there's a few extra days that I can train. So really just gearing towards that, trying to up the intent of everything, and yeah, feeling motivated for that.
How do you find that when you've done this kind of training during the off-season, how good of a shape do you come in compared to the other guys? I talked to Mark about this because Mark is on it during the off-season. It's a great, some people use it as rest, other people are like, okay, now's the time to get in shape. Like you said, you've got this extra time, chance to train hard, you feel like you come in like with an extra, you're already ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, it's funny because I think I treat the gym and training as like an extra hobby as well as rugby. So a lot of the other guys who play team sports, not just rugby but anything else, rugby will be their main thing, and then gym will kind of be a little bit.
Do you mean like you treat gym almost like a second sport?
Exactly, and they will treat that gym as kind of like an accessory to it, so they'll do it to try and better that hobby, and then when they finish the season, they're like, oh actually, I want a little bit of time off, and they're not as motivated to stay in the gym, whereas for me and for someone like Mark and other people who do train as a gym and really enjoy it, if anything, you can just up the intent in the gym, and
you once took a step back, you can push on with the other one rather than just resting everything.
Yeah, and it is good coming into pre-season, like actually feeling fit, because you see some other people when you do the first like fitness test, like whatever test you're doing, and they're horrendous.
On the flip to that, do you feel like you miss out on having like that rest and recovery, or do you feel like because you're already doing so much training and that's eased back, that's enough recovery to allow you to then come back into the start of the season feeling fresh? Because I think it's safe to say that at times this season you've been feeling a little bit like, not waiting for the end of the season, but you've been looking forward to this break. Do you feel like mentally you're tired from it, or do you feel like where's the head at with that?
It's been a long old season, so like these leagues that we're in, we have, last season it was more, we had 30 teams in the league. No, not 30 teams. 30 games, sorry, and that's a lot to get through. Yeah. I think for me, because it might be different for other sports, but because rugby is so just knackering on the body, so like 2 days after a game, you're absolutely dead. So like, even though I'm up in the training in the gym, I still just feel so much fresher.
Massive reduction elsewhere.
Exactly. So I can train harder in the gym, but like the aches and pains, it's so much easier to get through. Whereas when you're playing rugby, I mean, you can obviously, I've had injuries throughout the season, which we'll come on to and talk about later in this podcast. But just the generic fatigue that you get after a game, even after a hard training on a Tuesday, you feel knackered because it's more or less trying to simulate a bit of a game scenario. So, looking forward to it. I feel as motivated as ever. And then, if anything, towards the end of the season, I'm kind of, because you are just getting into a bit of a routine of training rugby, my motivation starts to sort of dip off towards the end of the season.
You can see. I think that's completely normal. Everyone's really fatigued. It's been a tough season. Like I said, a lot of travelling as well. Like every other dead game, you seem to be in Cornwall or bloody, up north. Like it's tough season, man. You're not playing fucking Sutton every week, are you?
Exactly. I wish I was. Yeah. So motivated. Hopefully this time off will motivate me, and it normally does to sort of come back to rugby. And it's nicer training in the summer. Yeah, what about you? How's your training?
Well, I reckon we can use this to lead into the first one about one of the subjects is training around injuries. Because this last week I strained my oblique, which is a really unfortunate injury.
How did you do that? Luke?
How did I do that? A good question, Max. I was playing basketball, and I normally take basketball fairly easy because I really enjoy it, but it's secondary to my powerlifting training. But went up, just got a little bit bent out of shape trying to block a shot and strained my oblique. And I knew in the game it was sore, I just hung back at the back. But this whole week, like it's feeling okay now, but like this whole week I've been trying to train around the injury as best as I can. Overall, like training's going fantastically well. Just obviously had a bit of a lighter week the good news is I haven't got any competitions or anything. So there's no strict timeline, so you can just have a bit of an easy week and try and set myself up as best as I can for next week. So I thought it's a good chance to talk about like how I've trained around it.
So what with this oblique strain happening, because we've had a few conversations throughout this week, what's been your kind of way? So when did you do it on Sunday?
I did it on Sunday.
Sunday, and then what was your kind of way around it from when it first happened? Because you were in a lot of pain sort of Monday, Tuesday, weren't you?
Yeah, so like going to sleep on Sunday, I tried to hold to the one side and like I just couldn't. I had to sleep on the one side.
And sneezing, coughing,
if I had to sneeze, I was like, no, I couldn't sneeze, it was going to kill. I had to fight sneezing as much as I can. Coughing, I was doing like a little rather than like a big cough, I just didn't want to cough. I was like, as best as I can, but just any time that would meet, it would just kill. It's like similar to like, I guess like if you get an issue with the ribs, it just like the day to day just really affected. So I came in on Monday and the first thing I tried was like, okay, I'll just put off a day or two doing lower body training, I'll try and do my upper body. I tried to unrack on the bench and I just couldn't unrack, like that old head position was killing me. So I just went out because I couldn't do anything.
Nice.
But then I came in on Tuesday and I did train twice actually. I was able to do the bench press as planned, so upper body has been absolutely fine. For the lower body, I couldn't put a belt on, so like bracing against that was just too uncomfortable. So the first thing I did there was obviously reduce to beltless training, which then reduces the amount of load that you need to put on the bar. And I also changed the movement from, it was meant to be an SSB squat, but went for a Hatfield squat, just so I could really assist staying a touch more upright. So Hatfield squat, for those that don't know, the SSB is on your back, but you got your hands out in front to kind of guide the squat pattern, which if you've not done that before, it's a lovely exercise for keeping that pure squat pattern of nice and upright, very knee dominant squat. And because of that, I was able to get up to like the normal loads I would have done on safety bar. Obviously using my hands ever so slightly, but was managed to adjust the exercise to fit the discomfort that I was experiencing.
I was going to say, and that's quite I'm not saying injuries are good, but it's quite motivating for you now, because we had a conversation the other day, didn't we, about you saying that actually you haven't done Hatfields for a while. You're actually tempted to put it in your program now
because it felt phenomenal. Yeah. One of the other subjects we're going to talk about is high and low days, but I think that's one mistake that I think I've been making my training, is pushing that second day a little bit too hard. The second squat day that I do, and then that's making me fatigue coming into another session. So maybe just going slightly easier on that day would feel good, and it felt lovely on the body. Like the next couple of days I wasn't feeling sore. I felt pretty good for it. So I think like when you get these little injuries, even though the oblique's not like a main one through like the lower body, just having to make adjustments. Like the first thing that we look at, I mean, you're going to be the same if you're working with yourself or your clients, is first trying to stick to the same training, but potentially just reduce the volume and the intensity down just a smidge. Whichever you like, what would you do first? Drop the volume, drop the intensity, try and
drop
keep
volume.
the same?
Drop volume, drop intensity, and then obviously work around the movement depending on like, it's all based on the individual and like their pain with it. So it's like some movements they might actually hurt. Like for example, with me when I did my ankle quite recently, I could still actually squat through it, whereas other people wouldn't be able to. So it's adjusting depending on the individual, and then dropping volume, dropping all that kind of stuff.
I remember Nats had an ankle sprain before, and anything lateral, like it was a lateral sprain. So as long as we went like feet underneath the hips, and like she could squat, she could deadlift, and just modifying those exercises slightly to fit the discomfort. Working around it is just the obvious thing to do.
And like a big thing nowadays, I'm obviously not a qualified physio, but like it's come out a lot, hasn't it? That when injuries do occur, unless it's obviously bone breaking or anything like that, like actually trying to get movement through and load through the body part that you've sort of strained is actually really useful. I think Owen, who plays rugby, he did his hammy in a game, and 2 days later me and Mark were telling him just try and actually get some really light load through it, like RDLs, try and get it going. So if you can get load through it, it's actually the most beneficial thing to do, rather than rest is obviously useful, but it's obviously come out a lot that resting, icing, all that stuff is quite bullshit really. So movement is the most important thing.
I think it's like you said, it's choosing appropriate movement for the severity of the injury. So someone like myself, it's a very, very mild oblique strain, so it was just the hard bracing that was the issue. But like I said, on a Wednesday, instead of main day, so I did RDLs up to about 120. Well, I only do about like 180, so it's probably about 30% down. But still able to do a hinge pattern with lighter intensity. If it was more severe, like if you'd have really hurt your knee, you might be doing, instead of a back squat, you might be doing a goblet squat. So light loading, you might have to reduce the range of motion, which might be the next thing you look at if you needed to. So there's this kind of hierarchy of things that we look at when we're trying to adjust these exercises. The first one is, I would say, try and keep the exercises that you're meant to be doing the same and just reduce the volume and the intensity. Probably keep the volume roughly similar if you're dropping the intensity. So if you've got 3 sets of 8 at 100 and you drop it down to 3 sets of 8 at 60, that's probably still going to be okay. And then the next thing you're looking at there is changing the movement for something that might be more appropriate for where you're currently at. So for yourself, with the ankle, you might not have been able to do a front squat. You probably could, but just for the sake of it. But you might be able to do something that's not quite as forward knee translation. So you might be able to do a back squat or a box squat. You're still able to train the movement, but slightly adjusted based off the issues that you're having.
Sticking to that program as much as possible, so that you're not differentiating from that.
And then the last thing, I guess, would be like the range of motion, wouldn't it? So if you've got a pec issue and you're bench pressing and you're doing all the way down, that might be uncomfortable. But doing a block press might be a way of getting some good load and some good movement through it, but just avoiding that end range that might be uncomfortable.
Did you talk about? Have you spoke about that on a podcast when you did your pec before your comp?
We've kind of spoke before about. I like the idea of training around the issue and trying to still get good load through, but then not avoiding that where the issue is. So like you just said with Owen, if his hamstring, he might not have been able to do like heavy RDLs. He was doing light RDLs to get some movement through it, but he's probably trying to do the rest of his training fairly heavy. So he's training around it and getting as much of a stimulus as he can, but then he's finding an entry point for the injured area and gradually building back in the movement. I think that's the key, really.
I think the worst thing you can do is just, if you do get injured, just stop doing anything and sort of go from like 0 to 100 on what it is. Where if you keep yourself motivated and actually get in the gym movement, stick to your program as much as possible, as you've said.
It's like if you've got an upper body, like Mark, when he tore his bicep, the next day he was doing sledge drags, leg pressing, leg extension. You can do something, man. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a day or two off if you're injured, but like there are ways to train around it and being smart. And like you said, it's actually to the benefit of it rather than it being detrimental to the long-term recovery. If you can actually get in and get some movement going, it's going to speed up the recovery versus sitting at home in bad positions. Getting no loading through to the scar tissue. There's I can't remember the name of it. There's a name, something law, where like if you just don't get any movement in the scar tissue, the muscle fibers align around the scar tissue from the damage. But if you keep doing movements, it does help with like the realignment and gets things kind of exactly how they would have been prior to the injury.
That's literally.
Don't quote me on that.
That's literally, so not going off piece too much, but that's what happened with me more or less. So when I was at my club before Bourneville at Canterbury, I was doing a pre-season game and I was kicking at the posts and something just twinged, and then I couldn't walk at all. My quad was in a lot of pain, and it basically turned out that I ruptured my quad, but the physio at the club didn't identify that it was a rupture, and so I sort of didn't really do much movement around it, left it for a while, and then because the rupture was that bad, the scar tissue was just kind of in the same place, but there was no chance of it actually healing to the degree it was. So if you ever look at my quad, if anyone gets a chance to look at it, I've always got this permanent dent in my leg now because of that scar tissue. So movement is always like, it's the best medicine for most kinds of injuries, whether it's like little strains, whatever. Just try and get yourself moving quickly as possible.
100%. Trying to find the name of the law.
The law.
Blah 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 law. Anyway, but that's like, I think like a really key thing for people, not to get too disheartened when the aches and pains happen of training. And it's not that you're training wrong sometimes, it's just part of sport. The injury rate in the gym is super low, it's higher in team sports, but just finding ways to train around it by adjusting your volumes as needed is the key, I think.
Completely agree.
Fantastic, cool. Next question, should we go for the nutrition one?
I like the food one.
Right, fantastic. We're going to talk a little bit, someone was asking about like calorie deficits and like how fast they should be looking to lose weight, etc. And it's quite well timed, as there was a study that we both have read called The Efficacy of Progressive versus Severe Energy Restriction on Body Composition and Strength in Concurrent Trained Women.
Do you want to talk about that in layman's terms?
So basically it was like a high calorie deficit versus a smaller calorie deficit. So we know to lose weight you need to be in an energy deficit, either doing that for calories in your food or by increasing your activity. So in this group, if I get the details up, there was a group that was on 25 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass versus 40 calories per per kilo of fat-free mass. So one's getting ahead of like almost double calories compared to the other. Not quite double, but yeah, you get the idea. One's in a very severe calorie deficit. The other group are in a smaller calorie deficit. And then they basically reduce this 5 calories per kilo every 2 weeks for 8 weeks, and then they've had a look to see how much weight they lost. Yeah. And actually the outcome was the same. Now, if everything was done exactly how it should have been, in theory, the group with the bigger calorie deficit should have lost more weight. So I thought it'd be cool to get into that and kind of the reasons behind why that probably has happened.
Yeah.
And like what we see like day to day is working in gyms as well, trying to work with people and support them with their nutritional goals. So do you want to kick us off?
It's all related heavily to this whole, like, a lot of people are still into their like intermittent fasting and all that kind of stuff. It's all based around just getting in a deficit, and some people can get into that deficit a lot easier by doing that fasting thing, whereas other people would much prefer having a more sustainable diet, being a much shorter deficit. So
I do think with the intermittent fasting, it does allow people to be sustainable. Because if you're on a very big calorie deficit, and if you can avoid eating for the first 4 hours and the last 4 hours of the day, and you're eating within that 12-hour or 8-hour window, you might be able to find it more sustainable. Right? Well, I think it works for some people.
I know that there's actually some people that go completely the other way as well. It's all individualised as well at this point, but like some people that when they have, say they're doing intermittent fasting, I don't know, say they've only got a 6-hour window to eat or an 8-hour window, whatever, they actually eat far more than they're supposed to within that window, because they just go completely the wrong way, and they'll just absolute binge crazy amounts.
The video's cut off. Let's just carry on. We'll do it about the video.
Yeah, I can cut this bit out.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like it's when, especially if you're, well, that's the whole point of this, is that it's whatever you find to be, what you can adhere to. So if you're finding that you're coming into your 8-hour window where you're allowed to eat, or whatever it is, 4 hours, 8 hours, I think 8 and 12 are the most common ones, aren't they? If you're finding you're coming into that and you're absolutely starving, then maybe you're not going to stick to the calories that you've been prescribed, versus eating a bit more gradual through the day. So it's going to be an individual thing, like you've said. But definitely. The difference between the two groups is that the group that was on the smaller calorie deficit was more sustainable and adhered to the diet, versus the group that was on such a severe calorie deficit, they just couldn't adhere to it. And there was times where they'd probably be having cheat meals or going way above the calories and maybe not logging it. And that's what we see all the time, is when people are looking for this really aggressive cut, they really struggle with their adherence. And they might be able to do it like 4 or 5 days, and then they have a couple of days where they're a little bit loose with it, and then they repeat. And actually, when you probably add it all up, well, the study showed that they got the same. If you're having like 5 days of severe drop in calories and then a couple of days where you're eating higher calories, you're probably equating for the week to the same amounts of calories as the less aggressive group.
Yeah, that's what I'll always tell my clients or people in general on the gym floor, like, sustainability is the most important thing. So it's like, if you create this kind of like negative relationship with food, then people will often bounce back even harder. And then if they're in this kind of gradual deficit, like we're saying, you're more likely to stick with it. You have more kind of openness to all kinds of foods.
It's a lot more flexible.
It's a lot more flexible, and then even the whole thing of like, if you're more sustainable, and say you're going out on the weekend for a heavy session or something, people can potentially bank calories. They can do loads of different methods to try and adhere to that. Whereas if you're in such a big deficit, you can't bank any at all. Like, to actually go out at the weekend as well. So it's just going to negatively impact you.
When you say bank, just to explain it for the
so
you're talking about, instead of eating 2,500 calories a day, you might eat 2,000 for 5 days and then higher calories on the weekend.
Yeah, I think it's a lot better motivation wise, if people, rather than look at calories on a daily basis, they look at it on a weekly one as well.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's so much better because that banking method can be used, and it's just,
we don't see each individual day then as a win or loss.
Exactly, and that can be so bad sometimes, because I know people that they'll go over their calories and think, I fucked it now, like I've done. Whereas if you go over, you just know, oh right, one of the other days during this week,
I've gone over 200 calories. I'll go 200 calories down on this.
Yeah,
perfect.
But by all means, like as you say, it can work for others. So like if you know you're going on holiday 6-8 weeks, whatever, people can go in a heavy deficit and actually lose a good amount of weight and look good.
This is what the study's shown, is that like when you put on a strict timeline for something, and you're going for such a high calorie, but you're like, I'm only got to do this for 4 weeks, or I'm only got to do this for 6 weeks, and I'm going to look really good at the end of it, or this is how I want to look. People that then find themselves that adhere to it more. So if you've got you've got a holiday and you want to look a certain way and you want to drop a little bit of weight, which some people do, you don't obviously have to. But if people want to do that, then having a timeline on it makes it easy to sustain.
Yeah.
But if you're just doing it indefinitely, it's probably better to go for a bit more of a sustainable approach.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about as well is when you drop your calories so high, like it's hard to sustain with the food, but also like your daily activity just naturally drops as well.
Yeah.
Like your NEAT or your non-exercise activity outside of the gym and outside of walking, etc., just drops naturally. And if you're just starving all the time, you're not going to have, like, you're not going to go for your normal walks that you might do, and that helps equate to the calorie deficit. So that's something else to think about.
There was I don't know how much it relates to this, but I was talking to Steve actually, and he was having a chat with Joe, the nutritionist, and he said that Steve was eating, like, he was in a big deficit, but he still wasn't particularly losing much weight, and it's because Steve was having like loads and loads of naps throughout the day, and that's just because he was on such low calories that his body was, if anything, shutting down, so it would get really tired, go to sleep, so you wouldn't have really, and you wouldn't be using as much energy then, so that's kind of a negative impact on it. So I feel like, I know if I've been in a very slight deficit, I have far more energy than if I am so much in a big deficit.
And this is why the reverse dieting works. Like people say, oh, your metabolism's adapting to the extra calories, which maybe is on some degree, but also you just, with higher calories, more energy, you're going to just be moving more. And your overall activity increases. So if you're eating an extra 100 calories, you might be burning 100 calories just by daily activity.
So. And it's one of those things that like life's good, man. Like, appreciate life. I don't think you can, if you're in a big deficit, you don't want it to then impact, like, meeting up with pals, you've got no energy to do this and that. Whereas if you're in a small deficit and it's more sustainable, you can enjoy things, you can still go out, you can play sport with your pals, you can do whatever you want to do, and then life's not too much impact then, like, life's short, so enjoy it.
Fucking deep. Getting deep on the podcast.
It's caffeine, it's no,
sugar free.
Yeah, exactly. No, but good conversation, I think sustainable is
key.
Overall
you can
key,
you sprinkle in the occasional bigger deficit, but then you need to add up as well, like what's more important to you, man, like dropping a couple of kilos for your holiday versus like enjoying your training, enjoying your life. That's down to the individual to decide. But cool, decent.
Next topic,
bit of a powerlifting one then. I guess I'll be taking the lead on this.
I'll come in back.
Well, tell me more about rugby again, or the turf games.
We'll do one day, we'll do me versus you fitness event, but we had
just the tough games,
little sprinkles of strength as well.
5k run and then a 1 rep max.
I want people to send in who they think would win in a fitness event, me or Luke.
Well, I can tell you the answer already. You. I'm not. That's not a question.
I don't know. For Adam at the old Metcon Games, he was strong. So I think powerlifters have a bit of more of an engine than you think. Now go on, take the lead on the powerlifting stuff. Go on.
Someone's asked about SBD Days. They're quite common in powerlifting. Obviously, not everyone listening is going to be powerlifter or powerlifting. But basically, an SBD Day is that typically at the end of the week, you would do squat, bench, and deadlift. And the rationale would be replicate what you do in a competition. So super specific. You get used to benching and deadlift under fatigue. It also allows predictability of how you're going to perform on that day. So typically, they would have SBD Day on a Saturday, and that's the day that most people compete. If you obviously find that you're going to compete on a Sunday, you'd probably move it to there. And then the idea is now is there's like the idea of tapering for competitions is kind of not as much of a thing as it used to be. Like people used to aggressively taper. Now people taper way less than they used to. And most people actually just train kind of normal into it. So if you set your week up that you've got your squat, bench and deadlift on a Saturday, the session before it might be a lighter session. At the start of the week, you're doing your kind of secondary lifts. So like I said earlier, mine's a safety bar squat, might be for someone else a pull squat, whatever they need to work on, that's obviously individualised. But then when you're doing your SBD week, your final week of your competition, you would train exactly the same as you were. So your first session would be safety bar, you might take an easy session for your final one, and then you've got your SBD, which you've already been doing. So it makes it super predictable to train. A couple of people have mentioned that I don't really give out SBD days, so I just a couple of people asked, so I thought I'd try and give my reasoning behind that.
Yeah, cool.
So the first of one, I actually do give people SBD days, but I really don't like heavy squat, heavy bench, heavy deadlift all on the same day. There's a couple of reasons. Is the majority of the people that train don't want to be in the gym for 4 hours.
I was going to say,
it's a long session, man.
If you're more or less simulating a competition, it's
because as well, like in a comp you're doing 3 singles. If you're doing an SBD day, realistically you're going to be doing back off sets as well. So each lift's probably going to take you about an hour. It's a long old slog, which fair play to people that want to do it. Just a lot of people don't want to be doing it. if I do give someone an SBD day, it would maybe be heavy squat, maybe heavy bench, but then a secondary day deadlift. And this is the main reason actually why I don't do SBD days for the bulk of people, is most people compete once or twice, maybe 3 times a year. So to me, it doesn't make sense to all the time plan your training around predictability of competitions when the competitions are so few and far between.
Yeah.
If you're only doing 2 or 3 competitions a year, if you're doing all of your deadlift training after the squat, which might be at detriment, you're not as fresh. Some people perform better on deadlift after the squats, but a lot of people would find it that you wouldn't be able to lift quite as much. So my argument is that rather than lining it up with competitions, if you did your deadlifts fresh on another day in the week, you might be able to lift a couple of percent heavier, you might be able to accumulate a bit more volume. Maybe long term you get a better stimulus from that, which would allow your deadlift to increase more so. And then, maybe the predictability thing could be there on a Saturday, maybe the last training block you line that up. But then what I like to do instead is give people their secondary deadlift day on that day. Mm-hmm. So you're still used to doing some deadlifting after your squats, under fatigue, but it's just a lighter day, where you're able to still get that work in, and then when you're a little bit fresher in the week, you're able to do your normal deadlift on that secondary day.
Yeah. Well, I guess it kind of links to, sort of to Olympic lifting in a sense that there's a reason that no one really, it's very rare that a lot of Olympic lifters will PB in the gym, on the gym floor. They'll normally PB at comps, and I guess it's kind of similar that you want to wait up until that comp, don't you, to PB kind of thing.
I know what you're saying. I'm not sure if that's what they're saying with the predictability. It's more like even if you're not PBing beforehand, it's like you want to make sure that you're feeling strong on this particular day. I know exactly what you're saying.
And I guess from an outsider's point of view, when you're at a comp, it's hard to replicate that on the gym floor, the adrenaline rush of everything.
There's a lot more to it, man.
So when you're actually there, you're more likely to be able to fatigue is going to be less of a factor because you've got adrenaline and everything pushing you through. Whereas when you're on the gym floor and you're doing squat, bench, deadlift, fatigue is going to be the main factor, and it's probably going to limit you a lot more than when you are on that 1-off comp, 2-off comp kind of thing.
The other thing is as well with like I said with the tapering is because you are on that day rather than just doing 3 singles on squats, which the first 1 or 2 singles on squats are going to be fairly comfortable, hopefully anyway. Then the third one's going to be tough, admittedly, but it's only 1 rep. So when you're in the gym and you might do a single at 7 or 8 RPE, and then you're doing 3 sets of 5 or a couple of triples, you're doing some hard training after it. You're going to be very fatigued coming into that deadlift. So I do think that just takes away from it just a little bit too much. The other thing is I think for most people, I don't train anyone that really underperforms on deadlifts come competition. Most people actually perform really well, and it's quite easy to get the deadlift to turn up on competition day. The lift that people struggle with is squat. Which is then when it makes sense to do that kind of non-taper thing that we spoke about. Because if you're always doing your heavy squat at the end of the week, it's really easy to set that up by doing your normal training through the week. Because that's how you normally train anyway, so all you're doing is your normal training week. And if you're used to squatting heavy on a Saturday and you haven't adjusted anything else in the week, it makes that predictability of the squat really easy. Then the deadlift, if you're squatting on a Saturday and you're deadlifting on a Wednesday, that last Wednesday session you just take a very comfortable, I typically for people is around a single or a double at 80%, so it's very comfortable work. Couple of triples, and then they're feeling sharp on the day. They've still had a bit of skill practice, but then they've tapered enough that coming into the day after 3 singles, which isn't a lot of work on comp day, they're ready to perform their deadlifts.
So why do you think that the tapering stuff has really taken a big step? Not step back, sorry, that's the wrong word.
It's not as popular.
It's not as popular as it used to be. What do you think the reasoning is behind that?
I think a lot of people used to believe in this really big super compensation effect from when you'd really be fatigued and then you strip that back and then you get this performance boost, and I think it just doesn't materialise for a lot of people, and I very rarely see it. I looked at the studies on peaking and tapering, and when they do this super compensation effect, you're talking maximum 3%. But then the other thing is people reduce the training volumes down, and then they come into the competition, they're not feeling sharp. They're feeling super fresh, but they're not feeling sharp and they're not feeling strong. So probably what's happened is they've tapered back that much that they've actually detrained, and then they're coming in actually feeling slightly weaker. So when you talk about doing your normal training week, if you set it up appropriately, so most people do this emergent strategy, as they call it, where you might have a 4-week block, and then that 4th week is when you do your heaviest double or triple or whatever it is on that Saturday. So then you would line your training blocks up so that the competition falls on that day. So if you're used to doing week 4 your heavy squat of the training block, you make week 4 the competition week, and then you just that normal training week just train as normal, and then you come into the session, you're used to lifting heavy on that week 4.
Yeah.
From your training data, you probably know that that's a strong week for yourself. So you're setting yourself up then for a good performance on that day.
Yeah.
So I think most people just found that actually when they tapered back, especially like lighter women and lighter men, they would just get weaker from the reduction in the volume. So I think people have just moved away from it.
Yeah, interesting. No, I like it.
There you go, a little bit of a rationale to why. Loads of people ask for that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. I guess that kind of brings us on to, we've got a couple more, trying to battle through these because we're getting through some good stuff, but high V low days.
Yes.
We kind of spoke about it just what I said with the SSB. The secondary day was a little bit too hard. It was starting to affect the main day, and I think that's similar to what you said about the rugby. Especially when you've got your training week set up, where you're having these days where they're a little bit easier to then try and prioritise a harder session later in the week, or for yourself in season of the game.
Yeah, I think within like team sports, like I can obviously only mostly talk about rugby, but I think in general, like team sports, like you want your heavy sessions to obviously be far enough away from the game or whatever sport you've done, so that you've had enough time to sort of recover, and then enough time that you can recover going forward to the to your actual session. And high versus low days are so useful because it's all about minimising fatigue but maximising performance as much as possible. So like
on particular days.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So if you can do your high day, for example, in rugby, normally your hard day is like a Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's far enough away from the game, and then you got far enough to recover.
You've had 2 days to recover, Sunday, Monday.
And then even if you do like a low day, maybe Thursday or even a Friday, depending on if you want to like potentiate.
Fridays.
Yeah, like all that kind of stuff. You want to do sort of as little as possible, that you're not going to be fatigued, but like the most amount that you are going to be firing going into that game. So high versus low days are so useful within essence, like the S&C world, and I guess it gives over to powerlifting as well, really, like with regards to like you don't want to be like absolutely fatigued, because you found yourself, didn't you, that you were doing too much on your low days, that it was then affecting those high days that you wanted to get the most out of it.
I think when you're looking at your training and you're trying to think about what you're trying to get out of certain days, you just got to make sure they don't all bleed into one. Because I think if you've got your high days and you've got your lower days, that's fantastic as long as they are what they are.
Yeah.
When you start to keep making your lower day harder and harder, eventually it's not a low day anymore, and you're coming in and grinding out reps and it's really difficult.
Yeah.
You're probably not getting the stimulus you want. So for most people, if they're like, you look at the barbell club members, they've got their 2 sessions a week of squats. Session 3 is normally an easy session, it's more focused around position. But if you're going so heavy that you're not pausing your squats and you're not holding your position, the question is then like, how much you actually get out of that session. And then the second one is, if you're then really beaten up for the next couple of days, you're coming into Monday not feeling sharp, you're feeling fatigued, you're not getting as much out of that day. They're just bleeding into each other. So I think the key with your training when you're setting it up is like trying to keep the harder days hard, the lighter days lighter, or the high days high, the lower days low, and make sure that they're not affecting each other. Yeah,
it's really trying to differentiate between like what the days actually are. So like rather than thinking it as, talking about the barbell club sessions because it's a good example really, rather than treating it as like 3 full body sessions, all out, whatever, like knowing that those first 2 sessions are based around trying to get some good numbers in, good strength, all that kind of stuff, and that session 3 is a bit of a low day, as you say, positional stuff. That's why that first movement will either be like pauses, tempos, front squats, whatever, and treating it as that and not getting too carried away, and understanding that what you're getting out of that session isn't strength, it's all about that positional stuff, maybe a little bit of hypertrophy still on there, but like the strength stuff will all come in those first 2 sessions.
It's what you're trying to get out of those other lower sessions. Like for your rugby, you've got your hard session on a Tuesday, which is great. If you all of a sudden turn your Thursday into a hard lower body session as well, come the game, you're not going to be feeling good. And your whole week is set up to try and maximise your performance on a Saturday. If your training is so hard that you're coming into Saturdays feeling tired, you've not achieved what you wanted out of the training. While at the minute you've got your hard day, that's your time to push. You've got your lighter day on Thursday, which is there to optimise how good you feel on the Saturday. And the key's to keeping that there. If you start your season and you're doing like a hard session on a Tuesday, then your Thursday session, you're doing like some sprint drills, you're doing some low volume work, maybe some power based work. Fantastic. But all of a sudden, if you keep adding volume and you keep adding intensity, all of a sudden that low day is not so low anymore, and then your Saturday's fucked.
And it's trying to like,
especially. Right, mate. Did your voice just break?
Yeah, a little bit. Sorry. It's trying to, especially during pre-season with rugby, it's trying to actually have that low day, sort of not as high as possible, but like trying to get everyone like acclimatised to actually getting good amounts of volume in, so that they can be recovered for that Saturday, so that you can push those boundaries within season. Because within season training, like in the gym, you're not trying to PB every week. You're not trying to put as much muscle on. It's just about sort of maintenance kind of stuff. So if you can have that load as high as possible, brilliant. But if you do need to take back, as you say, it is there. But like, it's trying to set the foundations as early as possible within that pre-season, so that you can still have good high numbers on those low days, but the fatigue isn't actually coming into it.
It's a fine balance as well. Like, I don't want to make people super confused, but like, you can definitely take it too far the other way as well, where you're not doing enough and then you're coming in sharp. That's going to sound a little bit confusing, but the ongoing thing is just trying to find that sweet spot where you're doing enough on your lower days so you feel sharp on your priority days, where you're not doing so much that you're feeling fatigued. And that's just the ongoing battle. Like, I've been training for years and I'm still doing too much on that one day and I'm trying to ease it back, and that's just the ongoing thing of training, just adjusting your training based off how you feel, which is why we always recommend tracking like your sleep, your desire to train coming into your sessions. And if you're finding that you're coming into your main stuff not feeling great, that's when you need to start to reduce it back. If you feel like you don't feel fatigued but you just don't feel sharp, then maybe you need to add a little bit more on that secondary day, or your day before your game. If it's the other way around, that you're coming into your game and you're feeling super battered, then you need to start to ease it back a little bit more. So
key is to always be as fresh as possible. We talk about fatigue a lot in a lot of podcasts, and it's a big thing within the gym world. But you don't want to come into every session feeling, as you're saying, feeling battered. It's kind of like, if you can recover as much as possible, brilliant. But like, if you are coming into every session feeling aching, having this DOMS effect, don't chase that at all. It's trying to be as fresh as possible.
But then on the flip side, why do you do a session on a Thursday?
It's
to set yourself up for Saturday, isn't it? You don't want to be feeling as fresh as possible, because if it's fresh as possible, you just want to train. So it's doing that little bit on that lower day to feel sharp, isn't it? That's the fine balance that we're trying to find.
Exactly.
We haven't got the answers because everyone's individual, but you're trying to do enough to feel sharp on your main days. But like you said, you're trying to avoid being super fatigued coming into your main.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
Fantastic. You wanted to talk about some optimal training.
Oh, we could sort of brush over this lightly.
Well, we've only got two more to talk about, that and the mentality on warm-up. So
this is kind of like a whole subject. It's very big within the social media world about this optimal training.
Speaking of your world, the bodybuilder.
The bodybuilder. I don't know what. I'm not a bodybuilder. It's this whole optimal training, and a lot of people going down the lines of it of like cable pulling at the right angles, pushing in the right angles, making sure you're optimizing your training as much as possible to hit the desired muscle within that session, compared to just sort of compound movements like, I'm talking like squat, bench, deadlift, bench press, bent over row, all those which involve a barbell, dumbbells, all that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of comparing the two, because I know a lot of people get confused about this optimal training compared to like being like, barbells are shit, you should never actually use them. And I'm not slagging off like this optimal training, like it is very useful to a lot of people, but I don't want people to get confused that they do need to be pulling at this angle to effectively hit their lats or hit their chest and all that kind of stuff. So I'll always say fundamental movements are the most useful thing in the world, and they're more transferable. So like, for example, if you're looking at like a thoracic seated row where you want to get into that T-spine as much as possible, to get into that position it's probably a lot harder like than needed. So like, actually just going for a normal bent over row or whatever, where you're actually hitting your whole back, is going to be far more useful to the gen pop compared to a gen pop doing that kind of movement.
I think even bodybuilders, like I think the danger with anything is this black and white thinking, where you think the compounds have to be separate to the optimal, you can't do both. I think that's where the danger comes with anything. So like, the group that only do compounds, if you're trying to be a bodybuilder, is probably a bit too extreme. Versus the other group that are only doing optimal, is probably a bit too extreme as well. Even if you're doing full body sessions, which is what we normally push, or upper lower, for the bulk of people that train here, that we work with, the demographic is that they want to do 6 days a week, bodybuilder splits. If you're doing 3 or 4 full body sessions or upper lower, there's room for both. But it's like you said, trying to prioritise your big movements, your bang for your bucks. And also, we speak a lot about like the intent of trying to do them. I think it's really difficult to do, like you said, a cross body, thoracic, seated row. With the intent needed to actually grow muscle, versus like a hard set of bent over rolls, where you're going to be going in with it intentful, trying to like add a rep or trying to control it better than last week. There's
less to think about, isn't there, doing that kind of movement?
And it's just more like from the get-go, there's more intent behind that set, versus if you're doing a set of 12 really slow tempo each back, to get to the effective reps, it's a lot of slow work to get there, and I think it just takes away sometimes from the set.
Yeah, and I think timings wise, like your average Joe isn't going to be wanting to do 5-6 sessions a week of like really breaking down each individual muscle. They want to get in the gym, do as little as as you say, bang for your buck, as little as possible to get the desired outcome they want.
Maximal results within the times that they have to train.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a big thing within bodybuilding, and I'm all for it. Like,
you keep up with the bodybuilding world.
Oh yeah, I love it. I think breaking down these optimal movements is useful. I mean, you'll see, for example, like Chris Bumstead, he'll get, as you say, he'll do both. Like you'll see him doing.
I was going to say, if you just said he doesn't do the bars.
I was going to say, don't worry. I was going to say he does like bent over rows, back like barbell squats.
Have you seen his squat?
It's incredible. Yeah, he deadlifts, he conventionals, he does all of it. Yeah, he does a lot. But then he also does like optimal movements. Like he'll do like things that will break down like his pulling, his pushing.
That's
all
what I'm
that
saying.
kind of
When he's doing a shoulder day or he's doing a back day, he'll start off with, let's say, deadlift, and then he'll do some bent over rows.
Yeah.
And then he might move to single arm.
Yes.
There's room for both.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think that's a nice little topic to sort of touch on. Just like optimal is useful, but fundamentals is the most important.
Fundamentals is key, and as we always say, it's just avoiding this black and white thinking where you have to do only compounds or you only have to do optimal. You can do both if you want to.
Definitely.
If you enjoy doing more of the optimal training, probably do a couple of compounds and then maybe jump on the optimal after.
Yeah, definitely.
But if you enjoy doing big heavy compounds, then fantastic.
Yeah,
I mean, look at you, because you're a bodybuilder, aren't you?
I'm not a fucking bodybuilder.
You've got a comp.
I'm not. I have got a comp. No. I think that. Don't quote me on this, but I think if you do sort of compound movements, I think they'll translate a lot better over to the optimal training rather than vice versa. I'd like to see. I don't know if there's.
Well, I know you say, so like if you build up your bent over row and add 10 kilos to it, your optimal's going to get better, but your one arm thoracic isn't going to improve your bent over row.
Exactly. I think
deadlifting will allow you to be a better one arm, single arm pull down, but that's not going to improve your deadlift.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a lot more useful. But yeah. Cool.
I reckon we'll leave it there.
Yeah, cool.
That's Hopefully you all found that interesting, guys. We've covered a few different topics. Hopefully you found them of use. But if you have any further questions, of course, you can either drop us a message on Instagram or any of the socials, or you can drop us an email. But yeah, thank you all for listening. If you've made it this far, we will see you on the next one. Thanks very much.
Bye.
I don't think it fucking recorded, mate. Do you know what we should do, mate? So the video, if you put it onto YouTube.